got started into game development at a young age. I really wanted to just get into the games industry as a young child because I've always loved the immersiveness that video games kind of give us, unlike any other media.
Obviously, I think like most developers, obviously you've got a passion and a love for video games. As soon as we got here, we started to realize it was very indie driven. There's a lot of big indies here that have kind of built a small community of developers, which is really nice. We knew that Northwest was, quite important for games.
Growing up in Manchester as a gamer, I was aware of things like Ocean, and I grew up in Cheadle, so I was right around the corner from Warthog, and of course pretty close to things like TT Fusion and whatnot, so I was pretty aware of like the kind of companies that were around and about.
There's a lot of creative industries that have been moving up here over the past couple of years. We've had ITV move up, and we see in the establishment of places like Media City, everything came together that we be based in Manchester and see where we could grow from here.
And it's kind of interesting how the UK games industry is becoming more known in the different areas. I think Manchester's a huge hub for all these smaller teams cropping up, and we're starting to kind of create our own identity.
I got my first console, it was a Game Boy when I was 6, it's like 1994. Loved like Nintendo gaming, really got into like kind of games journalism, loved things like N64 Mag. And I wanted to go into basically writing about games, and I did a media course at college, and during that they gave us an assignment to make like just a short 5-minute film. And at the time, so this was like 2005-06, so I'm obsessed with Halo, and machinima is the biggest thing ever. So I pitched him, I was like, well, can I make machinima? And the lecturer was like, well, what? So I had to explain like, well, you make a film in a video game. And he went, yeah, sure, that's weird, that's different, because everybody else is just going to film it on the college campus and it will just look samey. So he said, all right. And it was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life up to that point, but I loved it. And it was this like light bulb moment where I hadn't made a game, but I'd done something in a game in a way that I'd never done before. And it started making me think like, well, maybe I could make games. Right after that, I went to university, went to a games course, had no idea what I was doing. Spent 3 years on that, wasting my time playing Battlefield and Halo. And the course wasn't particularly great either, but it was my fault for not using the resources I had at the time. And so after that, I basically decided like, right, I'm going to spend another 3 years learning how to actually make games now. So I did that through modding Left 4 Dead and just tinkering around in things like Game Maker. And it was at that point that I was like, right, I can actually make games, like 6-7 years after the initial thought of like, maybe I can. So I properly started at Prospect as a business and kind of took it from there. Amongst me and the guys that I left uni with and then ended up starting Prospect with, at the time we didn't think that we could do the whole indie thing. We were playing games like Braid and Super Meat Boy and whatnot and seeing this big thing happen, but it never quite occurred to us that we could be doing that. Started just looking, like Googling like who's around here, and I discovered like the guys who made Puck, which is a mobile game from 2011-12 I think. It was made by Laserdog, and they were living around the corner from me. And I looked them up thinking, oh, this is some studio, and it's like 2 guys in a bedroom, just tinkering around making games. I was like, what? Like, well, I'm just a dude sat in my bedroom, maybe I could. And then that was like the moment where I was like, right, let's go out and find people. And I discovered the Manchester scene's like full of kind of 1-2 man crews and little clusters of devs and people partnering up. Once I discovered that there are actually indie devs in the UK, and I started going around to places, like there were all these clusters, like Alex Johansson was running Hud Dev Field in Huddersfield, the Smash Crab lot and whatnot were doing stuff in Hull, Ollie Bennett and Bruce Slater were doing, what was it called? It turned into Gamebridge, it was called something else, but up in Middlesbrough. So I was finding all these clusters of people who were basically already creating like groups and events and whatnot. Came back to Manchester and was like, there's nothing here. So I set up a company called Update Events, and the goal was to kind of fill in the cracks between things like EGX and Gamescom and whatnot. You have these like mega-sized shows, and then you have meetups like in pubs, but there was nothing kind of in the middle for like a couple of 100 people to meet up and talk about games and play stuff. I just couldn't really see anything like that. So I set up Update and made it kind of Manchester focused to begin with, doing events at Media City. We did a big evening meetup at Beer Keller in Printworks. We've got like 400 or 500 people from all around the country as well, because Manchester's almost uniquely connected to everything. It's like it's one stop away from Liverpool and Leeds, and it's easy to get up to Scotland and down to London. So I started doing all these events around here to try kind of bring Manchester together and start attracting more people to the region. But there came a point after about a year or so of doing this that it was like, okay, I can either keep going down this events route or I can go down the Prospect Games route. So I decided to go down the Prospect route and stop that, but fortunately there were other people around who had kind of similar aspirations, so they kind of, I think, picked up the torch and carried on.
Everybody, the doors are open. Welcome to the new Manchester Gamers Unite.
Manchester Gamers Unite started off originally as just what was going to be a one-off gamers meet-up with a friend that I made, Stephanie Gaskell. We both decided we just wanted to host an event for gamers at the time. It was kind of like a little party, but then due to the sheer size of the first event we had, we sort of were a bit overwhelmed and we thought about hosting more and more regularly. I started to see that we were becoming a bit of a hub almost for gamers and game devs alike. And that was when I started to focus more on expanding it and getting more studios in to showcase early development games off. We specialise in giving consumers direct access to the creatives behind their favourite products with no red tape whatsoever, in an environment where there's no formalities. It is just a case of you get to embrace the creatives behind the stuff that you love and speak to them on a one-to-one basis. I've always wanted to go into video games as a young age, and I went to uni and met my fellow co-founders at the studio whilst I was at uni, and we set up a studio together, and that was kind of my main entry point into the industry. I do feel like we have focused a little bit too much on down south, especially London centric, because we do have some fantastic events up here in the northwest that people do really overlook. It's mainly because obviously the attention is on more of your bigger consumer events such as EGX, that I feel like the northwest has kind of suffered a little bit from it. But as I say, I do feel like as we're growing a bit more, some attention is coming more towards us. So we are seeing more studios start to form up here in the northwest and seeing some southern studios move their way slowly up here.
Been in Manchester now for about 5 years, and we're just working on our next title. And there was never a plan to come to Manchester. Obviously we knew we wanted to make games, and when Sony XDev gave us that funding opportunity to make a demo for The Lost Bear, we came straight to Manchester. So we didn't really have a big understanding of the scene, but as soon as we got here we started to realise it was, well, for us particularly, very indie driven. There's a lot of big indies here that have kind of built a small community of developers, which is really nice. Obviously, Manchester's got Ocean and Rare Manchester, and now Sony have got a studio here as well. But obviously, Liverpool was quite well known for Sony Liverpool, which is a big company. So we knew that the Northwest was, you know, quite important for games. The Lost Bear was our last project, which is a 2D VR platform with a PSVR and Oculus Rift. So obviously a lot of people, when you say 2D platformer in VR, they don't really understand what that is. The way I would describe it is, imagine you was going to see a puppet show or a theatre show, but you're in a world that changes around you to match that world you're being immersed in. There was nothing like it when we was making it, so there was no way for us to say, this game did something like this, is there something we can use this and incorporate it? Even with VR at the time, there wasn't a lot of games out, especially for PSVR, so it was kind of working from scratch, prototyping a lot, and seeing what worked and what didn't. One of our biggest problems with Lost Bear was, obviously, as I say, it's a 2D game, so we've got you looking at this screen, but we want to use that VR in this. We want you to be able to look around and explore that world at the same time. So it was, how do we keep their attention on the game, but then pull that attention away when we want to scare them or show them something? So one of the things we found with VR was it was a lot of audio cues. Sound was really important. Being able to pull someone's attention, but then bring them back to the game was something that we worked a lot on, hopefully shows in Lost Bear. One of the big problems was having to hit frame rate. On PSVR, you have to be 60 frames throughout the game. Otherwise, Sony won't allow you on the platform. Obviously 60 frames is pretty hard to hit, but we was running a 2D game in a 3D world on VR, which renders it twice. So it was just a nightmare from a code perspective of trying to get that in a position where you wasn't going to throw up, because when you turn, everything moved around you. So that was quite difficult. With VR, it's definitely got a future. Obviously at the minute that is a small market, so it's not going to make you a lot of money. It's not going to make you massive revenue unless you have a smash hit. But like you say, we feel like we was ahead of the curve, and the reason we went with VR is we wanted to try something different. We wanted to see how a 2D game could be explored, and the sort of mechanics you could use in VR with that old sort of retro 2D gameplay. Obviously that made it quite difficult because there was nothing like it. But obviously with future projects, we now want to focus mainly on just a standard 2D game because we really want to hone our craft on making that 2D platformer before we go back to VR. We always wanted a boxed copy, but obviously PSVR at the time, most games didn't really get boxed copies, especially indie games. So we made it ourselves. And obviously EGX is a big event and we was a small stand, so we wanted to draw people in. So a way to do that was to share the box copies. People love box copies, so we put them out there. I think it was the Daily Mirror wrote an article about the Lost Bear being the rarest game of all time, box game, purely because we made like 10 of them and hid them all. But there was a little bit of backlash online because obviously we didn't have, and we're not allowed to print discs of the game. So we did put a disc in there with a sticker on, so it looked nice, but there was no game on there. It was just a code, which some people were found annoying. But for us, it's a box copy that we've made and we love, so I'm happy with that.
I remember looking on the day because I think I'd already met you.
Yeah. Literally just to print out a disc with a sticker on it, but people were pissed off the game wasn't on the sticker.
Manchester's been really useful in terms of making this game because we're basing a lot of the architecture. A lot of the city of Manchester has inspired the fictional city in our game of Turing. The town hall, the library, the architecture is very grand. Something that I haven't seen depicted in games as much as, say, London, as much as other cities which are more popular in England. The colour palette, the architecture, we tried to put in the occupation and make it feel very northern.
There was actually a group of us that graduated from the University of Central Lancashire. We did the bachelor's degree and also the master's degree. And it was kind of during the master's degree phase where we were kind of looking at the industry in the UK, where all the different studios were, but also it was kind of that leap point where we realized we could do it ourselves.
We were all here in the Northwest, so we didn't see a reason to move down south, especially things like rent being a lot more expensive, and we started a company with 5 people that had no money whatsoever, so it wasn't really much of an option.
It's kind of interesting how the UK games industry is becoming more known in the different areas. I think Manchester's a huge hub for all these smaller teams cropping up, and we're starting to kind of create our own identity. Whereas, you know, you'd have Guildford and you've had London, but it feels like Manchester's on the rise. So when we were looking to form the team, there was no real drag to bring us here because these small teams didn't necessarily exist. But now, you know, we're 8 years into White Paper Games, and so I think there's been more of a shift in the Manchester industry, which is just awesome to see. It'd be nice for, you know, more southern-based companies to bring their business up here. And obviously we have Media City just down the road, which creates a lot of really good networking opportunities, whether it's through the BBC that are there. There's a lot of trailer editing studios around here, and it's just the more weeks that go by and the more years that go by, there's more connections that you make in all the different industries that kind of spread outside of games, which is really interesting and inspiring for us to put back into the studio, I think. So The Occupation is a political real-time thriller, and so that means that every minute in the game world is a minute in our time, and so there's fixed ways to approach a given challenge. And so you'll start a level, you may be given 1 hour to complete your research as a journalist. And so you're pulling at different threads, following different narratives. And at the end of this short section, you'll have a meeting, almost like what we're doing now, where you'll ask questions and get responses. With grounding the kind of architecture around a Manchester environment, we wanted to kind of ground the narrative around that. So our previous game, Ether 1, was based around a Cornish 1940s fishing town. And I think just grounding a game in a specific setting helps you kind of build those foundational building blocks and tell a story that's then believable. We still wanted to keep the narrative-driven aspects of our previous game, Ether 1, and we wanted a core narrative drive. We want to tell important, meaningful stories to us. And so we kind of started with those core pillars, and we also wanted something a little bit less linear. Our previous game, we had puzzle design. It was optional puzzle design, but once you'd solved a puzzle, you kind of knew how to solve that puzzle. And so we wanted to do something a little bit more emergent, where you could tackle a challenge from multiple aspects, which kind of inspired from the immersive sim genres like Dishonored and Thief and those kind of games. We also realized that we wanted to do something a little bit more character-driven. So obviously it meant we had to create characters from the ground up. No one on the team had created characters before, and it wasn't a luxury that we had on developing Ether 1, which was why there are no characters in that game. But we kind of set these core pillars for what we wanted to do in The Occupation. We kind of just hit the ground running from there.
Seeing a scene emerge in Manchester, I think since we've been working here, it's obviously a lot easier to be connected to developments. Like we've got stuff like Gameopolis, and we even at White Paper Games organise every now and then like Unreal Engine meetups. So it's easy to kind of see those influences and groups of game development within Manchester come together.
Just to see the amount of studios that are kind of growing in Manchester, it's good to see a lot more development going on here.
When we were studying at university 10 years ago or so, we were told you kind of have to go down south to get a job. You have to be willing to move. It seems there are so many opportunities in the northwest, whether it's Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds even, any of the surrounding cities. There's a lot of opportunity, and with more and more studios opening up and slowly growing their teams as well. We started with 4, 5, 6 people, now we're 11. And so I think as those studios thrive and survive, it creates more opportunity for building the kind of quality studios that we want in the Northwest.
Based on a pun originally. Like I was watching a documentary on the Ottoman Empire, and I thought, why not create a world around anthropomorphic otters, and also set it in space, so we're not limited by, for instance, if we set it in the modern day, we'd have to adhere to like specific weapons, specific locations, whereas if we set it in space, we can just kind of make it up. So events like Manchester Games United has provided with such an opportunity to kind of mould the game with our consumer and along every kind of step of the way. What we've realised is that our intentions with a game don't necessarily match up with what a consumer wants out of a product. So we set out to make a party game that was also a shooter based on X amount of characters, somewhat along the lines of like Overwatch. What we realised is that actually with a party game, it's more about the connection between players and how they communicate, and the fact that the experience doesn't necessarily have to be one that is long, but one that is fun. There's a couple of reasons really why I would set a studio up in Manchester. From a personal standpoint, I grew up in Manchester. It's where kind of my heart is. Also from an industry standpoint, there's a lot of creative industries that have been moving up here over the past couple of years. I had an understanding that a lot of the jobs were a little bit further afield. We'd done some previous work at places like Team 17, which, although it's not too far, it's also still in the north. Based on that information, we knew that there was a possibility that I'd have to at least travel or relocate. As the industry grows and as we establish ourselves a little bit more and network a little bit more, we're understanding that a lot of the companies from the south are transitioning into the north because there's so much opportunity up here. We have some major players in the marketing industry. We have major players in TV and production, and a lot of companies that are paving the way and paving their own path and being demonstrations for Manchester. I think we're making a transition at the moment. Obviously, with most of the major events happening down south and most of the funding being from down south, there's obviously a focus on the industry down south. But as we're seeing more and more indie developers pop up in the northwest, be it one developer teams to like us 10 developer teams, we're also seeing a kind of a connection between the developers. We work with a lot of other studios in the Manchester area, and that's kind of a objective of ours moving forward, is to make a kind of collective developer pool for Manchester-based developers.
So Terrorworm is a fast and fun arcade game for PC. I've been trying to make it for about 8 years. Started as a mobile game, turned into a co-op adventure game. All of those versions sucked, so third time's the charm, and I'm going to make it with these guys.
In the near future, global conflict forces humankind to flee Earth. In the following years, humans devolve into Who-mans and fight over precious gems in far-flung galaxies. But on the planet Terra, something evil lurks beneath the sand. Terrorworm! Try to survive in an ever-changing arena of doom. Collect an assortment of shiny gems.
So I've been running Prospect for about 9 years. Started as a modding team, developed it into a company to develop mobile games, and then sort of transitioned into PC and console titles. Biggest claim to fame is a 3D platformer called Unbox Noobie's Adventure. From there we sort of took the company in the direction of focusing on those kind of games, like making really silly arcadey type action experiences. There's not a massive activity that's large scale taking place in the city. But again, I don't think that will happen unless a Prospect or a Tryhard or whatever does a really good job and grows. That's the only way it's going to happen. There's so much crap and just terribleness behind the scenes. And appearance is everything. Like, if you don't appear to be doing well, people, companies, whatnot will turn on you. Like, they'll rip you to shreds. So you always have to be putting out the appearance that, you know, this course is going well or my game studio is going well. Over the past couple of years, the number of times that we've been on the brink is, you know, it's almost more, it's less that I can count them and more, but it's just a day-to-day, it's like arcs of terribleness that overlap with one another. But publicly, nobody knows that. Like, nobody can see what's going on. It's a regular people going, oh, you guys are flying high, you're doing amazing. And they don't realize, like, we got 30 quid in the bank account, and I'm, you know, fingers crossed that next royalty report is the thing that saves us, and it just about does. And then we announce the next game, and people go, you need to be positive. At the same time, you also need to be realistic about what your situation is. And that's where you see companies going under and whatnot, is they don't crash and burn in a wonderful explosion of, well, at least they gave it their all and tried to do this amazing thing. 9 times out of 10, they just run out of gas and they're all looking around. And I've watched this happen a couple of times just in the past few months in ways that have affected me greatly. And you go, why didn't you do anything? And they went, we thought things were fine. We thought things were good. And it's like, hello, you're on the same planet as the rest of us? Are you in the same industry as me? Like, no, things are not fine. And that's the status quo. Like, again, it's not unique to this time period. Everyone talks about like, oh, the indie apocalypse, it's terrible for us right now. And it's like, it's never been good. For every Unbox Newbie's Adventure, a moderately successful indie title, there's, thousands of people slamming into a brick wall, making no money, putting their life savings into things, remortgaging the house to fund it, and it doesn't work out. It's like, thank God it worked for us. But most people who are still going after 4 or 5 years of like doing the indie thing, or even AA, AAA, it's skin of their teeth the whole time, and it's at every level. We're seeing right now everyone, EA's reporting that things are a little bit shaky. All the big guys are saying it's shaky, and the responses on Twitter are like, screw them, they're making loads of money. And it's like, yeah, but how much are they spending? It's so easy to buy into the message that you're pushing and buy into the lie. I did that with this company, and that brought us right to beyond the brink. It was like, we died, we were a shuffling zombie, and I somehow brought us back to life, but at tremendous cost to myself and everybody at the company. Games are bigger now than they ever have been. There's tremendous opportunities to make incredible games and making a huge amount of money doing it. There is always that hope. But you sort of have to go through that process and sort of have your optimism chipped away and let reality kind of sink in. And there will come a period like right after releasing Unbox. We released it in September 2016. And I remember November, December, I was talking to my partner and saying to her like the way I felt at that time was quite a chasm.
Do you want to?
It's all right. I'm trying to say this as a positive thing. It was this chasm where I said to her, like, I don't know if I can get through this, but I know that if I do, that's the only way I'm going to be able to keep doing this. And like, that was the only hope I had, was just, this either kills me, or it does make me it does make me in some way stronger to be able to keep going. And, despite the fact that I'm a bit teary-eyed, it did. Like, it did make me stronger. But I had to go through that. I had to go through that chasm first to get to this part. So, the feeling of having, like, all of your hopes and dreams stripped away and losing everything. You kind of have to go through it. You have to go through it to get to this point. Like, I know that I want to keep pushing forwards, but I think it's incredible the number of people, and especially in this city, like, because I know them, so I know what they've been through. And it's like the fact that anybody else is still going is an absolute miracle. And I really hope that the people who really do want to try do this do make it through the next 10 years, because it's going to be the hardest decade yet, I think, for the games industry. But you can't lose hope. If once you do, that's it. You're done.